What's up, brother Bill? Welcome to episode 6 of Politically Conscious. We're gonna make this one possibly shorter and sweeter than some of the others we've done. We've done a couple short and sweet ones before, but either way, we pop up on you, discuss politics, ideally from all perspectives. We had try to keep. I always call you a full-fledged leftist, which you don't apply, that you don't agree with, but that's just how I see it. You know what I mean? I'm an independent. And so today we miss it in a sense, the right side of things. But I think you just wanted to get into a formative conversation from what I understood. And I know just to highlight this again, just to getting directly into things, the tariffs was a big issue or big push during the things. And we've talked about it already on Politically Conscious, but you want to dig a little deeper. And so I basically wanted to really give you the floor. And then, as always, I'm going to play cuts that we're going to respond to that are not necessarily directed towards tariffs, if you will. Actually, a couple of other conversations about some of these cabinet picks, because last time we talked about Trump's cabinet picks and kind of ideally what he was doing. So we'll further some of that conversation. But I wanted to get kind of directly into the nitty gritty of some of the stuff you want to bring to the table for our show, Politically Conscious. If you are a first-time listener, we're just trying to raise awareness of political consciousness for our community, if that makes sense. But with that said, I'm going to lead with just a little bit that I recall from the conversation we had on one of our earlier episodes of Politically Conscious, Emille. As y'all can see, he's our political consultant. He can give a little more of his background. But again, just getting directly into things, I recall that you were kind of giving people a full perspective on tariffs can be good, can be bad. And so I assume at this time around, you've looked at some of the particulars, and that's maybe what you're wanting to bring to the table. But give people a little of your background, and you have the floor to kind of inform us on understanding what's going on with these tariffs and what it might mean for us as American citizens and the upcoming Trump administration.
For sure. So I'm Emille Bryant. I'm a political consultant. I'm actually a business management consultant as well, and I have a working knowledge of politics because I've helped with congressional campaigns and I've written speeches for people who have been running for office. But I'm also a very concerned citizen, and one of the reasons why is because when I was in the military, I was wondering why my nation was asking me to do the things I was asked to do. So these questions are salient to every citizen, not just somebody who may deploy overseas, but rather there are a lot of questions that when we answer them, we see how they have an effect on our everyday life. And that's really the way I like to frame politics is how does it affect the way I wake up, go to work, make money, raise my family, perhaps retire, and all those questions in between are really how politics should be working in the mind of the average person.
Nice. So, like I said, let's jump right into it because I'm gonna tell you what I specifically recall from the conversation we had about tariffs previously on the show was the idea of Trump during his political campaign was always pushing the idea of he was going to use tariffs, right? And There was this political divide on whether he should or should not. And you kind of just calmed us down on the show and says, "Hey, here's a reality: the tariffs that he had prior to presidency, Biden kept those. So let's just keep the reality of it. Again, we're not on either side of it. We were just giving the information. And so what you was highlighting that if they were so bad to a point, Biden didn't get rid of any. And then you broke down to how it ends up can be a cost, in some cases, a cost to us as citizens. And then you also highlighted how even though it's kind of used as propaganda to even suggest that tariffs sometimes, especially in specific industries, can have an immediate effect because the reality is in some industries, it's going to take a long time and the effect probably might not even be within that person's presidencies. So that's kind of what I recall, but I know you said you wanted to take it a little deeper. So I'm really giving you the floor at this point to break down whatever else you might want to add to that conversation.
The thing about tariffs that's really hard for people to understand is that the way they're talked about in politics is different than the way they apply. And that's kind of what I want. So you'll hear the president say, I don't like this outcome or this way that we're interacting with a nation. So I'm going to put a tariff on them to either punish them or influence them to make a different decision. So people listen to that language and they think that the country that is being tariffed or being taxed is paying that, and that's not true. if you ever traveled internationally in Montoya, you know that when you bring certain goods into the country and you declare those goods, you have to pay a duty. So the word duty and the word tariff are interchangeable. You're paying for importing something into the nation. That's what a tariff or a duty is. It's a tax on you, the individual, bringing the thing into the country. So when President Trump or President Biden or President Clinton or President Reagan, it doesn't matter the president, they have the power to impose these tariffs unilaterally on those goods. So they can raise or lower these tariffs fairly easily. They can work through what's called the International Trade Administration and the Department of Commerce, and they can say, these are the tariffs that we're going to impose on goods from these different countries. The business that's importing them, the American business that's importing those goods, pays that tax. So under Trump, between President Obama and President Trump imposed $80 billion worth of tariffs on goods that were worth about $380 billion. So a little more than a 25% of the value of those goods was imposed as taxes or tariffs on those goods. So of course, the American company that imports that stuff is going to raise their prices to absorb those taxes. They're gonna have to pay those taxes somehow, and we, the consumer, are going to be the person who sort of feels that shock. What is supposed to happen is the consumer says, hey, you're raising prices on stuff that I need or I want, and I don't like that company. Go source it from someplace that doesn't have as high a tariff. That could be a domestic supplier. It could be one of our trading partners like Canada or Mexico, although President Trump is going to add some tariffs to their goods as well, potentially. And then that would spur domestic manufacturing, right? So we would say, oh, let's do this. Let's find a better source so we don't have to pay this high tariff, this high tax, in order to get this good from this lower cost supplier overseas. Well, the problem is that a lot of the things in America are no longer, or a lot of the things Americans use are no longer sourced or manufactured here, right? A bunch of our lumber, for instance, comes from Canada. So if there's a tariff on Canadian lumber, then you can't just start cutting down more trees in America to build. We don't have the lumber mills, the sawmills. We don't have the capacity to increase our domestic production to match what would be taxed from, say, Canada. So we're going to see prices go up. In fact, that's what happened to housing prices from 2016 through 2022. It was really one of the main price shocks was those tariffs where we had lower cost lumber coming in. Now, sometimes it's a good process. Say, for instance, China has been dumping steel, not just in America, but across several developed nations in Europe and in America. They produce steel really cheaply. And then they come here and they undercut everybody who would manufacture steel at that same quality here in America. So then the Americans can't make a profit, and therefore the Chinese begin to corner the market. So they add a giant tariff on that, which makes the price of importing that steel higher, which allows the American producer to compete, right? So sometimes it's really good. And so what most presidents do is they try to find a balance to keep domestic production high and strong, while at the same time making sure there's a competitive marketplace for all the players, right? So that's usually how tariffs work. They'll be right? Well, Trump was using them more, and lots of presidents have done this, as a lever to control behavior from foreign nations. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't, but the price shocks we felt were pretty severe, right? So when Biden came along, he didn't say, I'm getting rid of everything. He was trying to figure out which are the best ones to do, or should they increase or should they decrease? If you look at the International Trade Administration's website, which again, if you guys don't know, I try to find original sources to everything I can. And if I do find a source that's not original, I vet it somehow. So I'm using the International Trade Administration's website, which you can find at trade.gov, and you can find all the stuff that I'm talking about. And what you'll find is the global trade the Global Tariff Finder tool. So you can find what the tariff is for goods coming from every country in the world. And they track that. They'll tell you how much money is being made.
So let me jump in, if you will. And
Sure.
So was there any particulars? You've explained it, to details here or whatever. But
Right.
I was wondering, since you said let's talk about this, were there anything particular that you saw that made you want to have this conversation? Because that's what's going to make this conversation.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's what I want to jump into.
The thing that I'm concerned about, what made me want to have a more detailed conversation, is the trade on, or the tariffs potentially on Canada and Mexico, right? So as many of our listeners know, we had the North American Free Trade Agreement, which was started during the Clinton administration. And some people loved it, some people hated it, but overall, it helped build up the US economy. There's a lot of downsides to that, so I won't say it was good for everybody, but it built up the US economy. President Trump thought that was bad, and so he renegotiated it, and there was an agreement. I can't remember the name of it now, but basically it was the trade agreement between Canada, Mexico, and the US, right? And that trade agreement was like a renegotiated NAFTA. They updated it because it was done.
I'm trying to push you into you got the detail. Right. So I'm trying to push you into the part that there's an issue. Like because we got
for sure.
To keep this going, we got to be on the issues, give them the right information.
I'm getting there. I'm sorry. I know. So the reason why I'm concerned is because we import so much stuff from Canada and Mexico that would be subject to tariff that right now are not. And that is the thing that I think people don't really understand is.
So let me ask a question.
Sure.
What made Trump say that he wants to tax Canada and Mexico too? Like, do you even know? I don't know. I'm asking, are you aware of, why it's a talking point? Because what I think the biggest thing that you have to understand, or that's worth understanding about this for us as citizens, if we're going to be politically conscious, is always being, if we say if you're tired of the propaganda, listen to us. So the main thing that I want us to do is just kind of weave through what's real and what's not. So I do understand that for the American people, and again, I'm not caring which president or which party does it, but if they say something that we as the public respond to and think is doing this, but it's actually doing this, I want us to be the place that tells them what it's actually doing. So are you aware of why he even, because I'm not, I'm asking, are you aware?
For sure.
When it concerns you, why is he even pushing that? Do you know? I'm asking, and if you may not know, but I'm asking.
So it's multifold. Let's go to Mexico first, because Mexico is kind of the easier case, right? A sore spot for the Trump administration, first time and this time, is immigration. So what he wants to do is say, hey, Mexico, if you do not control your side of the border better, these tariffs are going to punish your trade with the US, right? So this is where those tariffs come from. This is not the sole genesis, but what's one of the main main reasons for it is simply immigration. Mexico, control your border better, your side of the border better. There's too many people coming across illegally that you can stop.
Yeah, I get that. I'm just saying, jump to the tariff.
That's the number one.
Okay, so
the number two thing is that a lot of American manufacturers are jumping to Mexico because of the lower cost of labor, which then depresses American production. And so the NAFTA years ago did the same thing. There was an upside because a lot of information economy workers got paid better.
Right.
But now it's
help me understand. I'm trying to push you all the way to the
Go ahead.
I'm trying to push you all to tell me about, if we're talking about tariffs, I need you to get to the tariff part. You're leading up too much. Just jump to the tariff on Mexico is intended for what, or what does he think it's going to do, and how it might, why does it concern you? Like, just tell me that answer.
It's going to punish Mexico until they control their border better, period.
So then that's not a good thing. So why does that concern you?
It concerns me because we're such a strong trading partner with Mexico. They're one of our top 3 trading partners, that the price of so many goods that are made in Mexico are going to go up with no relief in sight for the American consumer.
So that's the point. See, that's what we got to jump to. So this is what I understand, for people to understand why we want to talk about tariffs. What I think I just understood, and tell me if I'm wrong, is be aware that while this tariff that Trump's going to possibly push on Mexico may eventually help them control the border, which is a concern for us as a country,
right?
Realize one of the consequences will be higher pricing. Like
in the near term, until American businesses figure out how they're going to resource or rebuild that capacity that's being taxed. The other thing is the border being
did I get that? Just tell me, did I get that part right? Because
you got it right.
You know what I'm saying? I'm just trying to jump you to how it made sense. I could be for Trump having tariffs for controlling the border, but they're not also telling me here's the consequence of it. That's
you're going to pay more money for goods and stuff that come from Mexico. 100%.
Does this now? Why Canada? Why is there a push to put tariffs on Canada? Because I want to jump to that, and then we're gonna get to some cuts.
No problem. Canada's a little bit different. Instead of it being a porous border, which is not a problem, they have a lot of goods that come from Canada that American producers could be making that has depressed the American economy, specifically lumber, but not exclusively. Lumber is one of our biggest imports from Canada. And right now, the American lumber industry is not doing as much as it could because Canada's got such a great price and product coming.
So then that would be a good tariff based on the way you've explained them to me today.
In the longer term, it would help revitalize the American lumber industry. That would be a good thing, but it's going to take a couple of years for that to kick in if they do.
So what's your concern? Is it so maybe that's not something you're concerned about? You're just wanting to bring to our attention
correct. I am less concerned about the tariffs on Canada in the near term.
Citizens, you just make.
But in the long term, it'll be good for the. I think
it's helping us because the big thing that happened with the housing industry and the price of housing, if you will, is a lot of builders and the people that buy these bulk of homes. They're talking about the quality of the homes. They stopped using lumber because of the pricing during the pandemic, right? Like that was a big issue that I don't know if you were aware of that, but they started using other material to build homes. And in some cases, the homes are not as sturdy. So that was an evident result of some of what you're talking about.
There are intended and unintended consequences every time we do this. And that's the balance that a lot of presidents miss and a lot of presidents get right. And a lot of people just don't know until you feel it. The other side of the equation is Mexico and Canada are going to add tariffs to things that come from the U.S. So there's going to be this tit for tat that might mean that some American businesses that export are going to feel some pain because now their exports are going to be more expensive to places where they've been trading, like Canada and Mexico.
No, absolutely. So let's jump to more cabinet picks, right? We had a conversation about, in a sense, the most divisive and the most, because again, I think what I learned from you on the last show was how many picks there actually are for the president to pick, right? And so when I realized, I think you said it was 1,400 that are actually something like that, 1,700 or 1,400 that are actually the Congress has to approve. Like there's more picks than that an administration in a sense has a chance to pick, but there are so many that have to be approved. And of course, the most controversial for any president are the ones that are going to kind of come and make the news. And we were highlighting on the last show that this time around, since this is his second presidency, Trump's been a little more bold and maybe pushing for people that are even more risque per se, or as you offered, you didn't feel like necessarily as qualified. But again, we're just putting that in some context. And so as he's further to go ahead and pick his pick, something that he pushed for was that he was going to try to have his cabinet selected by Thanksgiving, I think was something that he had pushed out. And for the most part, he's done that. From what I can tell, his most of his constituents love that about him, that, hey, I said I was going to do it by this time and I've done it. And we were highlighting how just one of Biden's picks just recently got approved just a couple of weeks ago, just talking about, in a sense, the entire process. But he's put his whole slate on the table by Thanksgiving as he's promised. That's something that his constituents I'm just listening in the news, they're loving about
sure.
That. Any thoughts just about the additional picks? And I'm going to play a cut from our friend Shelley Winters talking about one particular pick that we didn't talk about on the last show, but I want to get your response before I play the cut.
He's done what you would expect somebody who's been there before to do, right? He's going fast. He's picking the right people for what he believes is going to push his agenda. And he's done it in record time because, he knew exactly what he was doing. He didn't have to guess. And that transition is going to be just the same from now through January 20th. He's going to hit the ground running because almost everybody that he's nominated will probably sail through Congress, and all the stuff that happens normally in Congress during that after January 20th stuff is going to happen starting now. So you're going to see a
Wow.
lot of whirlwind activity starting today, and he's going to have them lined up and knocked down, boom, 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 as soon as the new Congress is sworn in.
So it's almost like he learned from the first time around. Just kind of listen to you say that.
His any president that does what he's doing, and I think Teddy Roosevelt was, I think, the last one that did it like this, where he had a break in between. You will see those presidents really go fast the second time. The learning curve is much, much more shallow than it was when the first time they were out.
And let me tell you, this reminds me, when I was thinking about, him meeting that deadline, here's something else that it made me think about was, we just had, obviously had the transition meeting with Biden. And, our friend Shelley, I don't know if you saw this on his page, but he was like, look how happy Biden looks. And if you remember, Shelley was highlighting that he personally didn't think Biden wanted Kamala to win anyway. So he used that as a, just as something to be funny or whatever. But, they had that transition meeting. I recall when Trump took over from Obama specifically told him, you're going to be, I know you're, kind of want to push hard, but you're in a city. And this is the example that he gave Trump. He gave him the example that he says, when you want to get something done in this town, particularly DC, you know what I mean? The capital,
Mm-hmm.
He says, think of it as a carrier ship for the military. Like, of all ships that you could turning around a carrier ship is very slow to do. That's what the warning that he gave Trump. Now, what happened was Trump literally disregarded that advice and put so many executive orders and moved fast, even as a first-time president, to get some things done. And it actually beholden some of his most fervent constituents to say, here's a list of what Trump was able to do in his first year. And if you recall, on our show, we were talking about how the Biden administration failed to list out, because they got stuck into identity politics. They failed to list out some of the favorable things that they did. And Trump, if nothing else, is a great messenger, actually disregarded Obama's advice and literally had a list in the first year. So based on what you're telling me now, it's if you're for what he's doing, you're gonna love it. If you're not for what he's gonna do it, you're gonna hate it, because he broke records the last time.
He's got a favorable Congress on top of all of that, right? So last time he did not have a favorable Congress, and they were very deliberate. This time it's not going to be so. Now the Senate's not going to be a rubber stamp. I know that, but they're also not going to be nearly the kind of resistance that a democratically controlled Senate would be. So it's going to be warp speed from day one.
Matter of fact, I'm gonna flip and play this other clip, because we always remember we talked about on the last show, like, don't get caught up into the identity politics to the extent that you don't stay in the game. And so regardless of whether Biden really wanted, Harris to win or not, here's something as a last stitch effort that Biden did that I thought was pretty cool. And I found, and I'm gonna share it with you and see what your thoughts are.
Oh, Joe just pulled the Hail Mary. 61 black judges appointed, 39 being black women. Folks was telling Joe Biden, do something, Joe. Joe did something. You gotta respect the game. You gotta respect the game, because nobody on planet Earth expected this from Joe Biden. To the point that Trump is out here tweeting, we gotta stop this, guys. We gotta stop it. You wanted folks to get them black jobs. Folks got them black jobs. This is probably one of the most historical things that has happened in order to protect democracy in this country.
So the game is still being played.
It's going to be played to the very last breath. Joe Biden knows the game. He's been around this for 50 years, so he understands what he's doing. And he knew, he's like, man, I see there's going to be a problem. So President Biden appointed 61 black judges, including 39 black women, to lifetime appointments on federal benches. That's kind of the big deal here, is that they're lifetime appointments. These are not judges that will come and go with administrations, which is why you heard the reaction you did from President Trump. These are judges that he cannot summarily replace. So what what happens in every administration, there are a bunch of vacancies. And then through the course of the administration, they try to fill those vacancies. And then Senate has to approve several of those vacancies. And so it goes slow and there's a bunch of vetting and all that sort of stuff. But there are ways to get around that. And you're watching President Biden go right. He's going right at the problem. He's using the power of his pen. He's staying within the law. But you expect every president to do some of this, especially one that knows there's going to be some turbulence during the transition or perhaps afterward. And you're seeing that he's like, every vacancy I can fill, I'm going to try and do it. And I'm going to try. And there's a continuous list of vetted and highly qualified people that the president can pick from. He's presented that list all the time. And then he tries to pick as many as he can from that list. So
I'm just highlighting
this
to a degree. Yeah, it's a counter to, in a sense, that favorable Congress to an extent, since the reality is, like you said, Trump's moving at warp speed, and he's walking in with a favorable Congress and Senate. And so here's another way the game's being played. Again, we're just breaking down the checks and balances that are in our system, where they are, again, we don't care what side you're on of it. We're just having this dialogue. And so to further talk about another pick, again, this is actually the cut I was talking about where our friend Shelley Winters was talking about one of Trump's picks, and I think it gives us an opportunity to continue talking through politics versus being stuck on a side based on what you believe. So I think this is the only reason I'm sharing this cut, because I think it gives us an opportunity to further this discussion.
Talk about Trump's labor. Talk about Trump's labor pick, because I'm seeing a lot of people upset. Lori Chavez Derema, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. He's his labor pick, and a lot of conservatives I'm seeing are mad. A lot of conservatives are mad about a bunch of these picks, and it's kind of interesting to me, because as we've always said, and I've always said, Trump is no dyed-in-the-wool Republican conservative. He's pragmatic, right? He ran as a Republican, but, he used to be a Democrat, much like myself. He's much like one of the reasons I like him is because I get him. Like LGBT stuff, that doesn't really, it's not the thing I'm going to die on a hill about. Men playing in women's sports, yeah, I'll die on a hill about that. But not really going to get too uptight about the other stuff. You want to have a parade? Go ahead. You want to sell a T-shirt in Target? No skin off my back. Does it need to be front and center when I walk in the store? No. Do you need to have men playing in women's sports? No. Do I like drag queens reading to 5-year-olds? No. But all the other stuff, you have the same right to life as I do. And Trump sees it similarly to me. But Lori Chavez Derema, right? So conservatives are mad, right? And let's be honest. Trump campaigned as pro-worker. He campaigned as this. He never said he hated unions. As a matter of fact, we as conservatives, when Sean O'Brien spoke at the RNC, he's the president of the Teamsters. Remember, we all cheered. Yay, look at the Teamsters. Yay, 1.3 million members. We got labor. We got the unions. We all did that. Many of your pundits that are now against this pick cheered when Sean O'Brien spoke at the RNC convention. Well, what did you think? He was just speaking to speak? You don't think that they were working something out? You don't think that they were saying, hey, man, can we get a pro-labor person as your pick? I'm not against unions. As a matter of fact, I've spoken to several unions here in Georgia. I'm not against unions. Now, I think some unions are bad and some unions misuse their power, i.e. the teachers union. But I'm certainly not against the police union. And none of you listening to me right now who are conservative, who hate unions, hate the police union. So if a union is good for one group of people, or the firefighters union, if a union is good for one group of people, it's got to be good for others. Protection of workers.
So I play that cut because if you get caught up into propaganda, you actually might think Trump is a full-fledged conservative and he's going to do everything that's in quote-unquote Project 25. The reality of politics is this labor pick is historically, she's pro-union, which is typically a Democratic talking point. But she historically has been pro-union, and Shelley highlights how Trump is pragmatic in selecting her for a variety of reasons. And again, I think that brings, in my opinion, an opportunity for a nuanced dialogue versus getting caught up in any propaganda that tells you any politician is this way or that way. And obviously, if we're going to continue to show, and Trump's currently the upcoming president, a lot of these conversations are going to be about what he is doing or not doing. And so again, just using this as an opportunity to show the nuance. And again, this is not being in favor or disagreeing. It's having the nuanced conversations so that we're not listening to the propaganda. I hope that makes sense. But just any thoughts about what Shelley's perspective was on this actual pick that a lot of conservatives were shocked and disagreed with?
Yeah, first of all, shout out to his pick, because she's from Oregon and I am too. So, I got to give her.
That's enough for you, right?
Right. But the other part is that he is being more pragmatic than we thought he would be. I will not say he is pragmatic, but I will say he's being more pragmatic because he understands that he's going to have to appease certain groups of people. The assumption was that he was going to go full tilt on everything that people read in Project 2025, when in fact, he's got to make some compromises. Congress is a compromise he's going to have to make. They still have the power of the purse. He still can't do everything. We can talk about the Department of Government Efficiency in a moment when we talk about why that's not scaring me the way it's scaring everybody else. Okay. And then we can also look at his pick, especially the Department of Labor, where she is for organizing for unions in places that don't have one. So not only is she a pro-labor, she is a pro-union, and she is a very ardent supporter of an act that protects the right of workers to organize. So this is actually, it should make the conservatives a little wary, because it is something that they thought would not happen. But this shows that he's willing to put a Department of Labor, someone in charge of the Department of Labor who can be a force or advocate for labor activity.
And tell me if I'm wrong. And again, you're the expert here. I'm the moderator and just try to keep up with things. But is it not an example? Because during when we were talking about the actual exit polls, right? And it was all these different areas where there were some surprises based on who actually voted for him, right? We didn't talk about this area, if you will, but he actually catered to. That's how he even got the Teamster guy there, right? Like he actually made some, campaign, if you will, promises to the laborers, to the workers. And this pick actually ends up being something that's consistent with what was
full circle.
You see what I'm saying? And
absolutely, it's full circle with the tariffs, right? So the tariff picture allows him to say, I'm protecting American business, i.e. American manufacturing. And then he can say, here's my Department of Labor pick that also protects the American worker. So he can make an argument that he's doing for American workers and American manufacturing what he promised through tariff and this pick. Yeah, he's actually absolutely paying back the bill that he was charged for that support, 100%.
And so he got a big switch of people in unions who typically would not. He was able to gather that vote. So now I'm about to play a clip that quite often is highlighted as a negative. And my bigger point in playing both of these clips is, if you're watching the media from the perspective of when it comes to politics, oh, look at all the people he lied to, which this clip is going to be an example of that. I'm also showing the reality, the way politics plays out. You should never buy into it 100% one way or the other. So this is a clip where it's the opposite, if you will, to a degree. And we'll talk about this as well. But it's just us showing the reality of how this political game goes. The give and take will be some wins that are promised. Sometimes you will fail at things. Here's another example.
The 2017 tax cuts. The Washington Post reports some are pushing for new work requirements and spending caps for these programs. Congressman, your thoughts?
I've had extensive conversations with the chairman of Ways and Means, Jason Smith, also from Missouri. And look, we've got to find a way to pay for these extension of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. This is a vital key, important part of our economy to extend these Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that came about in 2017. We've got to find a way to pay for some of these. And part of it is, yes, trying to improve, especially the food stamp program. I'm on the Ag Committee. We've already looked at ways to do that. Maria, we have $34 million a day in waste, abuse, and fraud in the food stamp. We call it SNAP, Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program. This should be a life vest, not a lifestyle. When you have $13.6 billion a year in waste, abuse, and fraud, that has to be reined in, and every dollar counts.
So the point is not said clearly enough, so I'll say it, is in the case, if this stuff is the case, a lot of beneficiaries of these programs are the MAGA crowd.
This is this is one of those moments where there's going to be this tension that happens with every president every time they go out. So in the Democratic side, they have a big tent and they appeal to lots of people. So that tension is much more likely to come out. But in the Republican side, there's still this tension. The tension is that there's a subset of people who want this president to win and yet want the programs that this president promised to cut at the same time. So that tension is going to play out more and more as those people just start to see the first and second order effects of that decision. And he knows it. And he also knows that some people are not politically savvy enough to follow the line of logic that he's proposing. Like if he says, I'm going to extend the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and I'm going to pay for that, and I'm going to find money in these mandatory programs, these must-spend programs, because the number one group of people who are affected by those programs are in red states and probably voted for him. So it's very much going to create some tension that he's going to have to answer, or Congress is going to feel some pain because Congress is going to say, yes, you want to cut it, but I'm not giving up my voters. I'm not going to affect my district with those cuts. So yeah, you go ahead and propose those cuts. We'll see if they make it past me, Senate or Congress.
Right. So yeah. So that kind of. So yeah, you're saying that in the event that he has the Senate, he has the House, but you're saying based on a politician in a certain area, that's they maybe have the same R behind their name, but it doesn't mean that R is going to vote for it based on that senator, he or she keeping her position based on the number of constituents they may need for a particular program. That's the reality of politics, and that's the nuance that we love to talk about.
Let me broaden the logic just a little bit because people don't really see it the way that I do sometimes, and I like to explain this. How big should a government be to administer a nation of 380 million Americans? What's that optimal size for a federal government, right? So we have elected 537 people who can decide the size of the federal government, right? And those 537 people are going to decide what the optimal size of a government is that oversees the common good, health, welfare, and life of the people. For some, that means more people. For some, it means fewer people. But really, the question should be, how efficient is that government? How effective is that government? Not necessarily its raw size, how many millions of people there are. The expectation that smaller is more efficient and bigger is less efficient is not always true. So the questions that we're asking about the size of government do not relate to the function of government, which should be, are you getting the things you need from your government that make your life successful, however you define that? And if you can say yes, then it doesn't matter if it's a giant government or a small government. It matters the effect it's having on your life. And so these questions about, these programs are in the exact same manner. Is the program helping you? Yes or no? If it is, do you want to continue it? Yes or no? And if you do want to continue it, are you willing to pay the cost of what that program does in order to achieve that benefit? If we have those kinds of discussions, it makes it a little bit easier than we're cutting or we're not cutting. Does it work for the people intended to affect? Yes or no? And if so, can we make it more efficient or more effective in order to pay for it properly?
And then what happens is when you get when it gets thrown in the political narratives, then numbers get spewed out of context. And
Always.
So, right. And so that's like, for example, even the number you just heard, I'm going to give people context that they probably never heard. And I'm going to put you on the spot real quick. So the guy points out how many billions are spent on SNAP, if you will, or whatever. I think the number's like 13 billion, maybe 14 billion this past year, if you will. If you had to guess what percentage of that was out of the government budget, what percentage would you guess? That 15 billion that's spent on SNAP, and the context without nuance. Let me throw this out real quick to give you a better shot. And I know you're not going to miss bad because you know this stuff. What I'm throwing out is the context is the senator or whoever's talking about it, based on what side of the aisle you're on, they'll say the whole number because that number sounds big, right? And they'll say the people that are abusing it, but they won't point out out of the 15 billion, what percentage is actually being abused. They'll just give you the whole number and leave you with the context as if the whole number is the amount that's being abused. So they'll just tell you, we spent $15 billion on SNAP last year, and we got to find a way to pay for that number. If you had to guess, out of our entire budget, that 15 billion is what percent, if you had to guess, Emille?
Woo! So I know.
Just give me a guess. You're right or wrong. We're gonna keep it quick. Just give me a quick guess.
It's less than 5%.
It's 2%.
2%.
So we get real politicized and put on sides on something that's less than 2% of our entire budget. But if they just tell you the number in billions and don't tell you our overall budget is 4.92 trillion, then 15 billion sounds like, oh man, my tax dollars are going to waste.
That's the propaganda. Yes, sir.
For somebody that's abusing, because they're wasting 15 billion. No, 25% stay on SNAP for a lifetime. 75% get on and off in 2 years. Basically, use the program what it is supposed to be used for. This is not me even propping up SNAP. It's just putting the numbers in context and realizing and telling people for the abuse amount. And I'm not saying 25% of it being abused is okay. I'm just highlighting that it's not the entire 15 billion. And I'm highlighting that the 15 billion is only 20%. And so, the last thing I tell people is, even if you get the money back, you know what our government's never going to do is give the money back to us individually. They're just going to move it to another program. So you're still never individually, I'm paying for this family over here to get this stuff. They're never giving you the money back. They're never giving you the money back.
Identity politics, though. That is one of the highest forms of identity politics.
Yes.
And they sneak it in under these numbers. They say, oh, look, these numbers. Well, if you look at SNAP spending versus defense spending, right, the numbers don't even compute, right? And the problem is, like, if you look at the numbers, 94% of the money spent in SNAP goes to the people who need the benefit, who are getting the benefit. The other 6% goes to administrative costs to the state and stuff. Right. So you're actually spending a lot less than most charities would spend on the dollar that they get from a donor that is used to support the cause. 94 cents of the dollar that is given to SNAP goes to the people who are hungry. That's not bad. Yes, there's fraud in that. Of course, there's fraud. And the thing about fraud is really kind of interesting. You don't cut the program, you increase enforcement. If you really want to get rid of fraud, you put some teeth behind enforcement.
That would be the dialogue versus pitting the American people against. And so, so while that clip I just played, if you are against Trump, you will say, see, they voted against their own interests. He's finna get rid of their program. You know, I'm just saying that's the way it'll be put in a political context. But here we're just breaking down, regardless of what side you're on. And I'm not saying we could be for or against it, but I just want you to know you're talking about less than pennies on the dollars. Like I've even in my book, Re-Education of the Negro, I even have a piece where I actually break down that on average, if you just put everybody together, we keep 88 cents out of every dollar we make. That's averaging everybody together. That's averaging everybody together. And so then if you go take that 12% and put it up against the budget, if the government gave it back to us, we'll get 3 cents back a year. I'm just talking about literally putting it.
They're
not going to give it back, regardless of whether if they cut the spending or keep it, whether they get rid of the program or keep it. They're not going to give it back to us, but you would be getting 3 cents back. Like I'm talking about, that's on your dollar.
Even the tax cuts are suspect in that way, because you see the tax cuts are not an across-the-board tax cut. It's always targeted. These people who create jobs allegedly get a little bit more, and the people in the middle might get some tax cuts that sunset in 2025, which is why we're having this discussion about finding money for the extension. Because the funny thing about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was that the part that applied to the wealthiest 1% of taxpayers, that stuff did not expire. The stuff that applied to the middle class taxpayer, it expires next year. So this is why that particular senator was talking about we need to find money to pay for it, because it's going to come back around.
You're not going to get that revenue.
Yeah. And so there's a tax increase for the middle class that's going to come if they don't find a way to pay for this. So the way they want to pay for it is to find fraud. Well, that's one way to pay for it. But the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was a $2.1 trillion tax cut. And you're talking about finding maybe $15 billion.
And you can't find the $15 billion because all of it's not fraud.
Right. So it's like
25% of that is fraud. So you're not going to find no money, is your point.
Those of us who have a change jar know that collecting quarters and nickels and dimes is a lot faster than collecting pennies. And that's what they're talking about. They're trying to find pennies when they should be looking for quarters and dimes.
No, absolutely. Again, I don't care what side you're on. Just wanted to explain that. And so we said we're going to keep this one a little shorter. So I'm going to play another cut from my brother Shelly. And this is just a kind of a shot that he took at the media. And I was just curious at what you thought about it. But it kind of breaks down what you're always talking about and why a show like this has to exist. And again, you're always talking about sourcing, and that's who you are. That's why I have you on this show. You're going to go to original sources as best as possible. That's who you are. And so I thought this example that our brother Shelly clowned CNN for is something that just kind of speaks to why a show like this has to exist. But I'll let you give your thoughts after hearing it.
Okay, listen to this.
Realistic in real life, but I do believe that media, everyone sitting here at this table, if you don't agree, we're in for some tough years ahead. I do believe that we are not going to be able to be as safe or say what we want to. I don't think.
Stop right there. We won't be as safe as say what we want to. So she's saying that we're in trouble in the years ahead, not because they've been lying for the last 2 decades, not because they're just fronts for the government and fronts for the Democrat Party. They're because they may not be able to say what we want to say.
Free speech is going to be as free.
Now, Scott, I want to bring you in here because this kind of linked to Orban. We don't pull it from nowhere. There was a former member of the Hungarian parliament who was writing in Politico who kind of talked about this effort by that government and how specific it was in terms of purchasing media specifically for propaganda. Do you hear why they're making that connection?
I mean, is the concern that certain media outlets would become propaganda arms of political ideologies? I mean, don't we already have that in this country at a large scale? I mean, also, I heard what you're saying about X. I saw a survey this week. It's now the most ideologically balanced user platform of any platform.
Stop. It's too early. I just sat down. I've only been here for 2 minutes. You cannot continue to say
the show, but
you cannot say that.
So that's the case.
Who's the source of that?
What I find, we reported it on this network.
Stop right there. The host, the fill-in host said, who's your source? Scott Jennings said, as a matter of fact, X, which is, they're talking about Elon Musk. The panic is with them. Elon Musk might buy MSNBC. That's what they're talking about. So Scott Jennings, you heard him say that basically what he's saying, that a billionaire buying a media outlet for partisan reasons is a bad thing. You didn't say that when Bezos bought the Washington Post. You didn't say that. You didn't say that when Twitter. So then he says, so then she says, what's your source? And you heard Scott Jennings almost laugh at her because she's the temporary host. She's the fill-in host. Almost laugh at her and say, right here on this station, on this network. And they still kept doubling down. But listen, this is what he was talking about. This is Harry Enton on CNN explaining that Twitter is the most balanced ideologically.
Not accurate, and you know it.
And it's how's he really doing? Yeah, how is he really doing? So if you looked at that opening slide, what did it say? It seems like Elon Musk is losing but he's actually winning. So one of the big reasons he bought Twitter/X is because he wanted to make it his own platform, remake it in his own image. And I think this really gets at it. Look at this. The party ID among those who regularly use X/Twitter for news. Back in 2022, 65% of those who regularly use Twitter/X for news were Democrats. Just 31% were Republicans. Look at where we are today. Just a completely different picture. Now it's basically split between Democrats at 48%, Republicans at 47%.
That's CNN. That's where Scott Jennings heard it. And they question him. What's your source? You're full of it. You don't know what you're talking about. But their own network said Twitter is now basically ideologically split 48-47. But they call it a cesspool. You know why they call it a cesspool? Because there are people on the internet that will disagree with them and show them where they're wrong. Oh, boy, it's good time.
So right on the spot, they're battling him, and the source is their own station. And the reason I'm having this dialogue, again, for somebody watching, you will have to come to understand we're not on a side. I'm just using the example because that very same thing happened on this show. Remember when Shelley was on the show and he was highlighting how Time magazine pointed out everything they'd done to keep Trump out of office. He gave a little incorrect context. I didn't figure it out till after I did more research. I never got a chance to bring him back on the show to call him on it, if you will. But on that same show, you highlighted, well, okay, that may be the case, Shelley, but I wish that Fox, if you will, would be honest enough not to have to be taken to court to be honest about their efforts to, if you will, trick the people. And so this time we're playing an example where, on the spot, obviously that new co-host was not aware that what that guy was saying was actually sourced and correct. And so she tries to call him out on his own network. He says, you're going to be embarrassed when I tell you where the information comes from, because she was clearly there to push an agenda versus be factual. The big thing that Shelley highlighted at the end was people on the internet, the politically conscious of the world, will call you with the actual information. That's my bigger point versus being on the side. And I thought it was a classic way to end this show.
It was beautiful. And the thing that we, you and I are trying to do, I think is the yeoman's work here, is get people comfortable that what they're seeing on any major news platform is propaganda, not just this platform or this platform. All of it is slanted towards someone else's agenda, and you need to vet everything, or you need to stop listening to them for those issues. If something happens in Japan, there's an explosion, a tsunami, by all means, go to because they can put the resources on the ground that can tell you what's happening there. Anything else, you need to take with a cube or a grain of sea salt, pink Himalayan salt from Salt Lake City, but you need to take it with some salt, because they're always going to shape their message to influence your thinking. And the way we do it here is we're trying to be more above board to give people a chance to make their own assessment by going to factual sources and not somebody who's trying to present an opinion as fact. And what the CNN host found out is that her own network was pushing an agenda and refuting itself at the same time.
And so that's what we're here for. I go by a mental activist. I'm a philosopher, if you will. And I've always explained when it comes to politics, I've been saying this for years. If you love listening to a specific political channel, whether it's MSNBC, Fox, whatever the case may be, I said, if you love listening to one, you have to listen to the other, the opposite, to find out when your side is lying to you, because otherwise you would never know. So don't fall in love with one or the other. If you do, you are buying into propaganda that may not be serving you. So that's why we say, if you're tired of the propaganda, listen to us. We're just not coming with an agenda, not saying all our information is. That's why we try to have the full gamut so that things can be challenged. That's what we're open to. And that's what the broadcast that you've bought into, accusing the other side of not doing, they're both doing the same thing, the exact same thing.
So what we've done is surrender a lot of our critical thinking to billionaires right? And what's funny is some of the most conservative people, some of the most conservative billionaires own the outlets that are considered the most liberal. So you can't say,
and that goes vice versa. I mean, that goes vice versa.
100%.
Like for Shelley, and we know he's a MAGA proponent. His station is owned by liberals.
Right. So
nobody would never know it based on what his station,
what his show is about. And that's the part. And that's the part I want y'all to, our listeners and viewers to understand. The people at the top of this economic stack have decided that it doesn't matter what their individual political view is. They care about how you spend money. And so whatever it takes for you to spend money on their behalf, that's how they're going to influence you. So Rupert Murdoch starts Fox News, and he says there's a gap in the conservative news market. Right. I'm gonna fill it. Boom, and he makes gobs of money. Right?
And got caught lying via the court, had to admit it.
$787 billion settlement, and that's one of two. The second one is still pending. And then the other thing is that Disney bought ABC and bought all the stuff that ABC had, including ESPN. And so Disney, which is not necessarily conservative or necessarily liberal, but necessarily a giant mega corporation that makes lots and lots of money, said it is to our benefit to aim our news this way. So it doesn't matter who's in charge. They're all looking to get your dollar. And how they choose to do that is looking at the market and figuring out what niche they can fill in order to get you to spend money with them. And if we remember that, then we can take all of those news sources with a grain of salt, because everybody's looking for our dollar. Period. And what we should do as consumers is we should start demanding that everything we listen to is sourced properly, or they don't get our eyeballs, because we should not be subject to the propaganda we're subject to. And we have the power. They want our dollars. They want our eyeballs.
Here's the truth. Here's the truth. Something I didn't play on that cut is national news is losing eyeballs. Like, that's what's happening. And they're couching it as, we're under a regime in which we can't speak the truth. But the reality is, people are starting to see the truth for that matter, and they're actually going to the internet for actual.
They're on Twitter, they're on TikTok, they're on Snap, and they're getting news from individual citizen reporters. They're getting news from people who are just interested in a specific topic. They're going to YouTube and they're getting in-depth information with sources that help them decide how to think about something or how to get more information about something. And that is the problem. These propagandists called news have lost our trust, and they will not get it back until they begin to go back to sourcing things factually and being thorough in how they deliver those news bits.
Hey, good stuff, brother. Any public information you want to give out before we go?
My name is Emille Bryant, just myname.com. If you're interested in learning more about me, I have books that I have written that I'm happy to share with the world. But the most important thing is, please, please, please learn from Montoya and me and others like us who are trying to help everybody stay informed about what matters to you. So go to the original source. If you don't know, ask the question, where did this come from? And keep drilling down until you get the person with the clipboard. That's more important than my information. I'm not here to sell stuff. If you want to learn more, just myname.com and you got it. But more importantly, get to the clipboard, get to the source, because that's what matters to us.
Good stuff, brother. If you want to follow what we're doing, go to mentor.com, especially if you're in the Atlanta area. We got a business mixer over at Bakari's Pizza. We will start taking sponsorships for the show. And again, it's just to inform y'all of Black-owned businesses that need y'all support. So that is something that is forthcoming, but we're not taking big dollars for them to tell us what to say. We will never be that. All right, y'all. Holla at y'all. Take care. And see y'all till next time, till we pop up next time. Stay in the background. I'm going to drop the show.